You didn't fit in. It was a luxury cruise, my dad said when I discovered they used my money. I canceled every payment right in front of them. Now they're begging. I never thought I'd be the one to cut my parents off. But sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you beyond repair. The realization came on an ordinary Tuesday, nothing special about it, just another day of going through the motions. I was pulling into my driveway after a 12-hour shift at the warehouse. My back ached. My hands were calloused. Another day of honest work that left me bone-tired but proud. Mr. Jenkins from next door was watering his petunias. He waved as I killed the engine. "Mike, how's it going? Haven't seen your folks around lately. They are enjoying their cruise with your sister." My heart stopped. My hand froze on the car door. "What cruise?" He must have seen something in my face. The way his smile faded, the awkward shuffle of his feet. "Oh, the Caribbean one. Your sister posted pictures online. Your parents looked like they were having a blast in the Bahamas." I thanked him, somehow. I don't remember the words that came out of my mouth. I just remember the ringing in my ears as I walked into my empty house. The sound of my world crashing down around me. 3 days ago, just 3 days ago, my mother had called, crying, saying Dad needed medicine they couldn't afford, saying the heating bill was overdue, saying they might not make it through the month, and I had sent them $800, not the usual $600, because they sounded desperate. I sat in my darkened living room, staring at my phone, looking at my bank account. The automatic weekly transfers to my parents, every Friday for the past year, $600 like clockwork, my contribution to keeping them afloat, or so I thought. But now they were in the Bahamas, with Laura, my perfect sister who had never worked a day in her life, who married rich and looked down on my blue-collar job, who somehow still got all the praise despite contributing nothing. My hands trembled as I opened Facebook. I never used it much. Too busy working, too busy surviving. There they were. The pictures, Mom in a sundress I'd never seen before, Dad with a fruity cocktail, Laura and her husband Richard posing on the deck of a cruise ship. All smiles, all happiness, all funded by my sweat and sacrifice. I scrolled through the album, gathering evidence. The timestamp on the photos matched exactly when they claimed to be too sick to answer my calls. The geotags showed the Bahamas, the expensive restaurants, the luxury shore excursions. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. There was Mom wearing a gold bracelet I didn't recognize, Dad sporting a new watch. They had gone shopping in Nassau. That explained the extra $200 they'd begged for emergency medicine. The final blow was a comment thread under one photo. Laura posted how generous Richard was for treating Mom and Dad to this well-deserved vacation. My parents responded with heart emojis, and thanks to their thoughtful children. Children, plural, as if I had been involved, as if I hadn't been deliberately excluded while unknowingly funding their tropical drinks. I didn't cry. That would come later. At that moment there was only numbness, and beneath it something darker, something that had been building for years. Rage. I searched for more evidence, needed to know how deep this betrayal went. A quick check of my banking records showed the timing. My emergency transfer had gone through just hours before they boarded the ship. Another $800 straight from my account to theirs, tagged with the memo, Dad's medicine. There were other transfers too. Regular withdrawals over the past 6 months that aligned perfectly with shopping sprees. Expensive dinners out. Weekend getaways I'd never been told about. I pulled up my text history, reread every desperate plea for help, every claim of an empty refrigerator, every guilt-inducing, "We understand if you can't help us this time." Every thank you message promised they'd pay me back someday. All lies. Calculated, deliberate lies designed to extract maximum financial support while giving nothing in return. The story of how I became my parents' personal ATM started innocently enough. Dad lost his job. Mom's health was declining. They needed help making ends meet until they got back on their feet. I never hesitated. They were my parents, the people who raised me, who supposedly loved me, so I sent money, cut back on my own expenses, picked up overtime, did what a good son would do. But the goalposts kept moving. First, it was just until Dad found work. Then it was just until Mom's health improved. Then it was just until they caught up on bills. There was always a new crisis, always a reason they needed more. Meanwhile, Laura was their golden child, the daughter who made good choices by marrying a wealthy man, the smart one, the successful one. Never mind that I had built my life from nothing, that I had a steady job, a small but paid-for house and savings despite helping them, that I had done it all myself. No, Laura was the one they bragged about to friends. Laura was the one who got invited to family functions. Laura was the one who could do no wrong. And I was just the walking wallet, good enough to fund their lives but not good enough to be included in them. My girlfriend Anna found me like that, sitting in the dark, staring at those pictures, my phone clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles were white. Anna had been warning me for months, had noticed the patterns I'd been too blind to see. "It's always an emergency with them, isn't it?" she'd asked after my mother's tearful call about the broken furnace last winter. "And have you noticed it's always right before a weekend or holiday?" I defended them then, made excuses. They were getting older, times were tough. They wouldn't lie to me about needing help. But Anna had seen what I couldn't, or wouldn't. She'd pointed out how they never invited us to dinner but always had money for Laura's family gatherings. How they forgot my birthday but sent Laura lavish gifts. How they called only when they needed something but never to check how I was doing. She'd been right all along, about everything. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me. Let me show her the pictures, let me tell her about my parents' call for money just 3 days before. Then she held me while I finally broke, while the tears came, while years of being used and discarded poured out of me in great heaving sobs. Anna had always seen it, had always told me my parents were using me, that they favored Laura, that they didn't appreciate what I did for them. I hadn't wanted to believe her, because what kind of parents would do that to their child? Mine, apparently. The confrontation wasn't planned. I just found myself driving to their house the next morning, calling in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. The drive gave me time to think, to remember other suspicious moments I'd dismissed. Like the time Mom had called crying about property taxes they couldn't pay, while I noticed her wearing a new designer purse in a Facebook photo the very next day. Or when Dad claimed they might lose electricity right before I spotted him showing off a new set of golf clubs to the neighbor. Each memory hit harder than the last. The betrayal wasn't new, it was just that I was finally seeing it clearly. I'd been their safety net for years, their contingency plan, their personal bank with no questions asked, the reliable son who would sacrifice his own comfort to ensure theirs. Meanwhile, they'd been living the good life on my dime, taking cruises, buying luxury items, all while making me believe they were one missed payment away from disaster. Their car was in the driveway, they were back from paradise. Dad answered the door in his bathrobe, surprise on his face. Then wariness, he knew, somehow he knew that I knew. My mother appeared behind him, nervous smile, hands fluttering like trapped birds. "Mike, what a nice surprise, we weren't expecting you." I just stared at them, these strangers who shared my blood, who had lied to me, used me, made me believe they were struggling while they vacationed on my dime. "How was the Bahamas?" The words hung in the air between us. Mom's smile faltered, Dad's face hardened. "You weren't supposed to find out about that," he said finally. Not an apology, not even shame, just annoyance at being caught. Something broke inside me then, the last thread of respect I had for them. "3 days ago you called me crying for medicine money, and then you went on a cruise." Mom had the decency to look away. Dad didn't. "It wasn't like that. Laura and Richard paid for the cruise. We just needed to spend money." My spending money. My hard-earned dollars funding their umbrella drinks and souvenirs. "And you didn't think to invite me, or even tell me?" Dad's laugh was the final twist of the knife, short, dismissive. "You wouldn't have fit in, Mike. It was a luxury cruise. Laura and Richard's kind of thing. You would have been uncomfortable." Code for "you're not good enough. You're not like precious Laura. You're just the help." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. Right there in front of them, I canceled the automatic payments, all of them. The panic in their eyes was immediate, real in a way their affection for me had never been. "What are you doing?" Mom's voice was shrill, frightened. cutting you off, find another ATM, I'm done." Dad switched tactics. His voice softened, the voice he used when he wanted something. "Now, son, don't be hasty. We appreciate everything you do for us. We just didn't think you'd want to come. You're always so busy working. Working to support them, to fund their lives, to pay for trips I wasn't worthy of being invited to. Save it, we're done here." I turned and walked out. They followed me to the car, pleading now, promises flowing like water. They'd invite me next time, they'd be more transparent, they'd appreciate me more, too little, too late. I drove away with their voices still echoing in my ears. Missed calls lit up my phone all day. Texts flowed in. Apologies mixed with guilt trips, classic manipulation. I blocked their numbers. That evening the doorbell rang. I knew who it would be before I opened it. Laura, perfect Laura with her perfect hair and perfect clothes. The golden child sent to fix what the disappointing son had broken. Behind her stood our parents, and behind them Richard looking uncomfortable. The family united against the rebels. I almost closed the door in their faces, but Honor appeared at my side, squeezed my hand. We would face them together. Laura didn't waste time, launched straight into her practice speech. How I was being selfish, how our parents needed me, how this family had to stick together. "You don't understand what you're doing to them, Mike," she said, her voice dripping with practiced concern. "Mom's blood pressure is through the roof. Dad can't sleep. Is that what you want, to put them in the hospital?" She pulled out her phone, showed me texts from our mother, crying emojis, claims that they might lose the house, that they were eating ramen noodles to survive, all dramatic lies crafted to manipulate my emotions. "They raised you, sacrificed for you," Laura continued, her voice rising. "Remember when you were sick as a kid and Mom stayed up with you for 3 nights straight? Remember when Dad worked double shifts to buy your first car? How can you be so ungrateful now?" Rich coming from someone who had never contributed a dime to our parents' welfare, who had watched me struggle under the weight of supporting them while she lived in luxury. "And what about me?" she added, her final guilt card. "I'm your sister, your blood. We're supposed to be there for each other, and you're tearing this family apart. Is that the brother I grew up with, the one who promised to always look out for me?" She even manufactured a tear, one perfect droplet sliding down her cheek, the same performance that had always worked on our parents, on teachers, on everyone who fell for her act. I let her finish, let her run out of steam, watched our parents nodding along behind her, their faces hopeful, thinking their golden child would succeed where they had failed. "Are you done?" My voice was calm, steadier than I felt. Laura blinked, not used to being challenged. "Mike, be reasonable. They're our parents. They raised us. And I've been paying them back for years while you did nothing but look down on me." Laura's face flushed, the first crack in her perfect veneer. "That's not fair. Richard and I have our own expenses, our lifestyle." "Your lifestyle," Anna cut in, her voice like ice, "is not Mike's responsibility. Neither are your parents." Laura turned on Anna then, called her a gold digger, said she was turning me against my family. It happened so fast, Anna's hand in Laura's perfectly styled hair, the look of shock on my sister's face as Anna physically removed her from our doorstep. Dad tried to intervene. I blocked him. Mom cried. Richard just stood there watching his wife being humiliated, doing nothing. The door closed on their outraged faces. The lock turned. A line drawn, and for the first time in my adult life I felt free. The fallout was swift. Flying monkeys deployed. Extended family calling to tell me how disappointed they were in me. How I was breaking my parents' hearts. How Laura was devastated. I changed my number. Coworkers were recruited to plead their case. I switched departments. A week passed, then 2. My bank account grew without the constant drain of supporting people who saw me as nothing but a resource. Anna and I planned a weekend getaway, something small but special, something I could never have afforded while funding my parents' lifestyle. The morning we were set to leave, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. It was my father. Somehow he'd gotten my new number. His voice was different, defeated. The confident manipulator gone. Laura's husband had kicked her out, found evidence she'd been cheating, wanted a divorce, cut her off financially. She had moved back in with our parents, who now had both children at home and no income from either. They needed money more than before to support precious Laura in the style to which she'd become accustomed. The laugh bubbled up from deep inside me, started small but grew until I was gasping for air. Let me get this straight. You lied to me, used me, excluded me, and now you want me to bail out the daughter you always preferred? His silence was answer enough. Goodbye, Dad, don't call this number again. I hung up, blocked the new number, picked up my suitcase and turned to Anna, who was watching me with pride in her eyes. Ready for our vacation? She asked. I was, ready for that and so much more, ready for a life without the weight of ungrateful people on my shoulders, ready to finally put myself first. As we drove away from the house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever, peace. The first month of freedom was an adjustment. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, panicked that I'd forgotten to send money. My thumb would hover over their contact information, the habit of checking in nearly overwhelming me. But those moments passed, and in their place came a new reality. I started saving for my future instead of funding their lies, opened a retirement account, planned for vacations that I would actually get to enjoy, made decisions based on what I wanted, not what crisis they'd manufactured that week. There were still moments of doubt, times when ingrained guilt would resurface. My therapist, something else I could finally afford, called it the fog: fear, obligation, and guilt. The tools my family had used to control me for so long. Working through that fog was hard. There were days I questioned everything. Was I the monster they claimed, the ungrateful son, the selfish brother? But those days grew fewer, and the evidence of how they'd used me remained undeniable. That was 6 months ago. I've heard through the grapevine that Laura is working retail now, that my parents had to downsize, that they tell anyone who will listen how their ungrateful son abandoned them. Let them talk, the people who matter know the truth. Anna and I are engaged now, planning a small wedding, just us and the people who genuinely care about us. My parents won't be invited, neither will Laura. Some might call it petty, I call it self-preservation. You can only be burned so many times before you learn to stay away from the fire. To anyone who's being used by the people who should love them most, it's okay to walk away. It's okay to prioritize yourself. It's okay to stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. Family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, appreciation, reciprocity. I found my real family, the one I chose, the one that chooses me back every day. Here's what I've learned through all of this. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's manipulation. Financial abuse doesn't just happen in romantic relationships. It happens in families too. The people most skilled at pushing your guilt buttons are often the ones who installed them in the first place. I've learned that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. That helping others shouldn't come at the expense of helping yourself. That genuine love builds you up rather than draining you dry. Most importantly, I've learned that walking away doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you finally succeeded in valuing yourself enough to demand better. It took me years to understand that I wasn't responsible for adults who refused to take responsibility for themselves. That their poor planning and constant crises weren't emergencies I had to solve. That being a good son didn't mean being a good doormat. If you're caught in this cycle, know that breaking free is possible. The guilt will fade. The manipulation will lose its power. And on the other side of that difficult boundary is a life that's actually yours to live. And I've never been happier.